On the morning of July 3rd, the sky over Pennsylvania hung heavy with humidity after 2 days of relentless artillery fire. The Union defensive line stretched across the high ground, curving like a steel fishhook. Its center rested along the gentle slope of Cemetery Ridge, where the terrain bulged slightly forward, an exposed prominence visible from a distance. It was this bulge that became the target. General Robert E. Lee believed that 2 days of fierce fighting had exhausted the Union flanks. He concluded that Federal troops had been drawn away from the center to reinforce the ends of the line. If he struck directly at the middle and broke through, the entire fishhook would snap in two. The order fell to Lieutenant General James Longstreet. He understood the risk. Before them lay nearly a mile of open ground, devoid of trees, ridges, or any meaningful cover. Yet the decision had been made. The spearhead would consist of Major General George Pickett's division, supported by brigades from 2 additional divisions, some 12,000 to 13,000 men. They formed in deep lines behind the tree line of Seminary Ridge to the west, waiting for the signal. At precisely 1 p.m., Confederate artillery opened fire. More than 100 cannon shook the earth. Shells screamed across the valley, bursting behind the Union line. The objective was clear: silence Federal guns and shatter the Union center before the infantry advanced. Dense smoke soon blanketed the Confederate positions. From Cemetery Ridge, Union artillery answered with deadly precision, shells exploding amid the gray batteries. For nearly 2 hours, the sky became a storm of iron and flame. Then, the Union guns gradually fell silent. Some had indeed been disabled, but many ceased fire deliberately. Major General George G. Meade and his artillery commanders intended to deceive the Confederates into believing the Union center had been neutralized. Across the field, Lee watched through his field glasses. He believed the moment had come. Around 3 p.m., signal flags rose. The Confederate lines stepped out from the woods. They advanced in a long, unbroken front, battle flags rippling above them. No drums sounded, only the steady cadence of marching feet across the grass and the thunder of Union guns roaring back to life. At over 1,000 yards, artillery shells burst before the advancing line. At 700 yards, the guns shifted to airburst shells, shredding the ranks with lethal fragments. Bloody gaps opened in the gray formations, yet the men behind stepped forward to close them. The line continued to advance. They reached a wooden fence bisecting the field, an obstacle that forced them to slow, climb, and reform. That momentary hesitation allowed Union artillery to refine its aim with devastating accuracy. At roughly 400 yards, the guns switched to canister. Each discharge functioned like a massive shotgun, sweeping broad lanes through the advancing ranks. Brigades began to drift off alignment, bunching together to escape the enfilading fire. For the Union artillery did not fire only from the front. From both ends of Cemetery Ridge, guns raked the Confederate line from the flanks, weaving a deadly crossfire. At about 200 yards, Union infantry rose behind the stone wall. They waited until they could see the faces of their opponents before unleashing a coordinated volley. A curtain of white smoke surged upward, shrouding the hillside. Still, the Confederates pressed forward. One assault column surged toward the crest's prominent angle, later known as the high water mark of the Confederacy. They rushed the final stretch at a near run, stepping over the fallen bodies of their comrades. Some units reached the stone wall. In places, they surged over it, fighting hand-to-hand with bayonets and rifle butts. For a brief moment, Confederate battle flags stood upon the slopes of Cemetery Ridge. But these were isolated penetrations. Union artillery wheeled into position and fired point-blank into the attackers. Infantry from both flanks closed inward like iron doors. Those who had crossed the wall were trapped beneath fire from 3 directions. There were no reserves strong enough to widen the breach. Behind them lay only the deadly field they had already crossed. The formation began to crumble. Small groups fell back in disorder. The straight lines dissolved. The steady cadence of advance gave way to the desperate retreat of survivors, crossing the same open ground, now swept by pursuing fire. Union artillery and rifles continued firing until the range grew too great to be effective. The entire assault had lasted less than an hour. Nearly half the attacking force was killed, wounded, or missing. Pickett's division suffered such devastating losses that it ceased to function as an effective combat unit for the remainder of the campaign. To the east, fighting at Culp's Hill that morning ended with Confederate forces driven from the works they had seized on the night of July 2nd. No breakthrough there could salvage the failed assault at the center. By late afternoon on July 3rd, the battlefield fell silent. As the smoke drifted away, it revealed a landscape pocked with shell holes and strewn with bodies from Seminary Ridge to Cemetery Ridge. Lee rode among the returning survivors and is said to have told them,
"It is all my fault."
Yet his acceptance of responsibility could not alter the reality. The spearhead had shattered. On July 4th, under a light rain, the Confederate Army began its retreat southward. The invasion of the North was over. 3 days at Gettysburg had come to an end. The Union center had not been pierced. The high ground remained in Federal hands. From the moment the gray ranks turned back from Cemetery Ridge, the strategic initiative in the Eastern Theater would never fully return to Lee. The battle ended not with a triumphant shout, but with the heavy silence of a field after the storm, where the highest tide had risen and then broken.